Osiris.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Bruce Robinson Show. Hey, I'm your warm-up man, Joey Parisi, alongside his sidekick, Greg Knight, and the star himself, Mr. Bruce Robinson. I'm just saying that because we were at Eggy on Thursday, and the amount that this man was getting recognized and dapped up was just ridiculous. So clearly it's his show, it's his podcast.
Okay, very cute. Yeah. See, this is why, I was like, oh, let's just jump in. I haven't prepared whatsoever. And they were like, oh, okay. So is this because of this? I see we're going to be taking jabs at Bruce today. Which
is not a Bruce podcast.
I've been used to. I've been getting,
Not
this is a Bruce podcast.
This outline's been written for, I don't know, like 3 days now.
Acting like, I've been busy for 3 days. Some of those days I don't remember, but I've been busy for most of them. So
you make me feel like I've been locked out of Facebook.
whoa.
Yeah. So, Eggy was Liddy. Eggy was Litany Spears. We had a little great field trip. What'd y'all think?
All right. I was drunkenly yelling this at people after the show.
My favorite thing to do.
I've been listening to "Why Should I Worry" by William Joel from the movie Oliver and Company for the past 3 months. Thinking this would be a great cover for Goose to do at Radio City. It's such like a New York song. It just like popped in my head. I don't know why it came up, but I was like, wow, like that would really fit. And then Eggy goes ahead and does it. And I'll be honest, I freaked out. I started yelling and screaming, singing, dancing my ass off. And like, it really didn't make a lot of sense to people when I'm yelling, it's from Oliver and Company. But,
it wouldn't have made sense to me, but yeah. You did mention that. You did kind of mention that to me briefly after the show. And it's just funny how
I mentioned it to Jake. I mentioned it to Danny.
That's
embarrassing.
Yeah, it's excellent, but no, they need to hear it. They need to hear that you knew it was going to be a good cover. But it is funny that you've been listening to it for the last 3 months too. Totally random cover. I never would have expected. But
yeah,
God, the show was so good. I mean, and I was talking to a buddy of ours, Sal, who wrote a cool article y'all should check out for his master's
Skip
work.
Church.
Yeah, it was on
Church.
Yeah, Skip.Church, and it was cool about the community and around Goose and all that. But I saw him towards the end of the show, and I was like, oh, I got to go over and interrupt his show, obviously. But so yeah, we were talking, and man, I was telling him, it's like, dude, all of the shows I've been to in my life, there's just, you can always just feel when you go to one that just hits different, and it's really special in that moment. And it's going to be special when you go back and listen to it. It just hit my chords in all the right ways. They got so dark and cool in it and kept up a very energetic, very hard rock and a lot of dancing kind of vibe. It was really perfect. They were firing on all kinds of cylinders, dude. Definitely one of the best Eggy shows, the best Eggy show I've been to, or my favorite at least. And, one of the best ones I've heard. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, me too.
Mercury Lounge, dude, that grimy little bar. I love that about those places, dude. They're not the most comfortable, but man, they bring out the best in some of these bands. I will tell you.
Yeah, it was great for St. Patty's Day too. Everyone showed up a little. Everyone had their own pregame going on. I'm sure watching some games.
Yeah, we got to watch UConn lose. That was
great. Yeah. But yeah, I was drinking Jameson during that loss, and it definitely, it hit me pretty hard.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. We just kept drinking it. Well, as you can see, our lives are slowly falling apart with the band off the road. So I guess let's dig into the news. Cool. Thanks. Bingo theme. There it is.
Bingo theme. Back to our producer. Bingo theme.
So there haven't been any shows this week. There won't be for a while. And the band's clearly itching to get back on the road because they're going to play every festival this summer. RIP everyone's wallets.
My wallet's already deceased, Greg. My wallet has been buried under the ground for countless years now. God bless it, though. Right? RIP my wallet.
Why don't you run us through all the festivals we're going to spend money on?
Oh, so the guy who is unprepared gets to run through the festivals and gets made fun of. Cool. Good idea, guys. This is going to sell us a lot of CBD. By the way, shout out to the link.
20% off.
Speaking of water and Dripfield, we're going to Sweetwater 420 at the end of April. I definitely think I'm going to hit that Saturday at least. But that looks like an incredible festival lineup for sure. Beale Street is the very next day. In Memphis, and that's looks like a really interesting festival. And again, we talked about those last time, how they're going to be in some more of these pop, a little bit more mainstream, a little more indie festivals. So that's going to be cool. I see such workhorses in the notes, Joey, and I will not give them that credit. We are working very hard here at the Great Beyond.
Dude, but Boston Calling. The amount of festivals where it's like day after day, they're doing their own shows. They're playing a festival every single day of a weekend, like traveling. Fuck, man.
Yeah, true. It takes some
bus is really
coming
in handy.
Yeah, thank God for the bus drivers, and the bus itself. But Boston Calling next, and just like Beale Street, another one of those kind of more pop festivals. Bonnaroo next, the similar one. The Bonnaroo is such a variety of artists, and it's such a big festival. So another good one. Peach, going back to Peach after 3 years after their, epic, legendary now Peach Festival show, which we do talk about later with our guest. High Sierra, out in the mountains of California. I wanted to swing this. I really wanted to swing this. People have said it's awesome. Also has an awesome lineup. A lot of these festivals have great lineups this year. I feel like I've been so let down by lineups in festivals for so long, and these lineups are great. And then Newport Folk Fest, not a cigarette festival. Apologize to my mom
for smoke them if you got them, baby.
For everything I've done and said in my entire life. I'm sorry, Mom. But yeah, and then most recently, Sacred Rose. This looks absolutely epic. Speaking of epic festival lineups.
Yeah, I didn't realize it's like 30 minutes outside of the city of Chicago, and it's at a soccer stadium. So really easy. It's not like you're going in the middle of nowhere, have to camp out or anything. Like if you could get to and from the venue, I don't know if they're doing any type of camping. I wouldn't imagine they would, but
they're not playing soccer there. We don't play soccer in this country.
Yeah,
better use Sacred Rose.
Home of the Chicago Red Stars. Bruce is a big fan. And
what is that? The volleyball team? Oh boy. This is not a sports podcast, people.
This is a Bruce podcast.
Oh my god.
But Bruce, you're gonna lace him up and go to the Hipster Fest, right?
No doubt. And I'm also gonna wear, I've been slimming down, so I can get into this very tight pair of black jeans that I have. We're looking forward to that. I'm not quite Franz Petit Le Pen as of yet. My butt is still a little big, but we're working on it.
Yeah, we're getting there. We'll dance it off. And that's it so far. I'm sure there'll be 4 more festival announcements by the time this episode comes out. But hopefully everyone saved up some money, didn't blow it all on winter tour, spring tour, summer tour, fall tour coming up, because these festival lineups are just ridiculous this year.
Yeah, we need a Great Beyond tour bus. So buy some.
We need some more sponsors too. Yeah, I've been out of CBD, dude. I don't know what I'm doing. That's why I'm going crazy. Not enough. I need my fix, man. I'm sorry.
Well, I don't know how much of this news was actually newsworthy to any of you, but we have a very exciting guest joining us today. Writer, podcaster, author extraordinaire. Recently wrote the Uproxx article titled "Goose is the next great American jam band," leading to torch-bearing brawls in the comment sections across the web. So we were able to get him on to chat with us a little bit about this band that we are loosely tied to and why all of you online are wrong.
Yeah, except me. I'm online a lot. Usually right, almost always right. You guys are right sometimes too, as well. Most of the time, I'll say.
Well, thank you. That's why it's the Bruce Robinson show.
That's it. So we're going to get our act together before we talk to Steve and maybe consume a little bit of CBD. Stick around. Let's hear from the sponsors. Great Beyond Podcast, yet another accomplished guest that we are trying to keep up with here, the one and only Steven Hyden, also known as the Ween of American rock critics, author of 5 books. His next one comes out September 27th, and it's about Pearl Jam, good friends of ours. One day.
Good friends of the podcast. Yeah.
One day, we hope. And also host of, I guess there's another music podcast out there, 36 from the Vault on Osiris Network, new season. Steven, how are you?
I'm good, man. Thanks for plugging all that stuff, by the way. You didn't have to do that. You could have just introduced me as some random person. So I appreciate you, giving me my you plugged multiple things there. So I just want to make it clear that I appreciate the multiple plugs.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're hoping, we're pulling in that crossover Pearl Jam fan base from See Here Now.
Pearl Jam, man.
It could happen.
We also need people to know you're important so that they listen to the podcast.
Yeah. Well, someone worth listening to.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm important because I'm on this podcast. Let's be frank.
Oh, I love that.
I'm important because I'm on this podcast. So, I just want to be clear on that.
You're my new favorite guest, Steven.
That's it.
Exactly.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I think we can wrap right now.
I know how to suck up when I'm a guest. I can suck up with the best of them.
Oh man.
Well, in that case, let's dive right in. PR nightmare, PR headache, or PR triumphant move. The most recent article you released, Goose, is the next great American jam band.
Yeah, what a title.
Let's dig into it.
Did you appreciate that?
I noticed that title immediately. Yes.
I hope you appreciated that. I hope that was a gift to the Goose community and not a hindrance. But I could see how it could be. It could be either one.
Surprisingly, almost everything is a hindrance to the community, the Goose community. I know from moderating the fan group. And that is why the title struck me at first, because I said, this is great. I get why you made the title this way, and it's going to ruin my life for the next couple of weeks in the group. So I definitely appreciated it.
Well, and I'll be straightforward. I mean, when you're a writer and you're writing an article, you don't always write the headline, but I did write the headline for that piece. So I will own up to that. Goose is the next great American jam band. And, I wrote that because I happen to think it's true. So, there's just that. But also, you want to implore people to read your article. So you don't want to, pussyfoot around with whatever it is in your article. You want people to read it. But no, I happen to think it's true. And I just want to say, by the way, the response to the article has been great. And it's gotten great traffic, and I think by and large the response has been really positive. But yeah, I mean, I think Goose is deserving of that. I mean, I think it's pretty clear from their trajectory that there's a lot of energy behind the band. There's a lot of a lot of conversation going on, and I'm writing obviously for a general interest audience, not just people who are into jam bands.
Right.
And I've heard from people who aren't into jam bands who checked out Goose and were pretty excited to hear this group. I mean, I feel like there's like a lot of people coming in from the outside who are hearing Goose for the first time and are really into what they're doing. So I don't know. I mean, it's interesting to hear the various strands of conversation going on. I'm sure you guys have heard in the Jam Man community, there's like some people who are maybe responding to that in a negative way. But I really feel like on my end that for the most part, it's been like very positive, and people who love the band are excited about it, and people who maybe haven't heard them, they're checking it out and are digging into it for the first time. So I don't know. I really think it's warranted for Goose. Absolutely. Yeah. I have no regrets about writing that headline.
Yeah. Well, I definitely appreciate the headline. I'm sure these guys did. And I would agree that for the most part, reality, it has been really well accepted. It was a great article. It's well written. So there has been a lot of positive feedback from that, far more than negative in the real world.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And the headline certainly had a better weekend than Butter Rum did. So I think we can all agree there.
You guys and I already had an episode about that.
Yeah, because you guys did the Butter Rum breakdown, right? Already,
we sure did.
I haven't heard that episode of the podcast yet. I mean, like, can I just say this? That it's fascinating to me, and I'm sure you guys have talked about this on your show. The reaction from like some, and I really don't want to paint this too broadly. I think it's definitely like a segment. I don't think it's broadly, but like a segment of the Phish community who feels threatened by Goose. Almost like Goose is gonna like overtake Phish. Like Goose is like a threat to Phish, and like we have to somehow put them down because we love Phish and we don't want to worry about Phish's supremacy. And so now we're gonna like launch this sort of like weird criticism of Goose in order to put Goose down. I don't know. It's fascinating to me to see that unfold, like this hostility from a segment, again, I think, of Phish fans who just feel threatened by Goose. And it's like, whatever we can say to put them down, we're going to like say that.
It's definitely been a strange phenomenon to watch kind of grow organically, and then to see people's perception of it too, because it unfolds online where a lot of perception gets mixed in terms of how people can understand what people are trying to say, whether or not they're joking, whether or not they're coming from a place of anger or from being threatened or being defensive, or if they're somehow trying to be honest and just conveying it strangely. And it just has bred, such a little infighting sort of rivalry between, again, smaller segments, but very loud and very vocal segments of both fan bases now at this point. Because, to some extent, maybe Goose fans got a little overly defensive. I know I definitely did for a while, but I thought it was a different context. Phish can't be touched. They're multimillionaires. They sell out MSG every time they play. Let's give our guys or my friends, a chance to, make their way and find some success. And I'm glad to know that through that, it's kind of most people see what you were describing. And I thought you described really well about that. And it hasn't really detracted from their success too noticeably yet. And I just hope it, continues not to. I would love if that rhetoric died down, personally, but it is what it is, I guess.
It is an interesting dynamic because, and I wrote about this in my piece about how, like, when Phish was really blowing up in the mid 90s, there was this contingent of deadheads who were very dismissive of Phish. And it seems like a very clear parallel to what we see now, like where there's a contingent of Phish fans who are very dismissive of Goose. The difference is, of course, that Jerry sadly passed away in 1995,
right? And
the Dead really wasn't on the road for the back half of the 90s. I mean, there were different iterations of the Dead, but it wasn't the Grateful Dead with Jerry Garcia. So it kind of cleared the path for Phish to do what they did in the back half of the 90s. And it seems like Phish and Goose are going to coexist, as Goose rises and Phish is doing what they're doing. I mean, like, for me, I love both bands. You don't need to pick one or the other. Fish is obviously a great band. I'm seeing them at Alpine Valley this summer. I'm going to go to all 3 shows. I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, that's going to be fun.
But I'm also excited about this young band on the rise. I don't feel like it has to be an either or situation. But it is interesting to see the online reaction, which again, I think if you look at Twitter, you don't want to put too much emphasis on that, because I think it is a more heightened, exaggerated response to the music. And I really feel like most people would be like, well, I either like Goose or I want to get into Goose. And because I think most people feel like it's more fun to love something than it is to hate something.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Again, I'm fascinated by that reaction, and I'm curious to see how that evolves as the years roll ahead.
Well, I'm wondering, one of the things I think that's so impressive about your body of work, because we're plugging your body of work today.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Greg. So thanks for bringing it back to like what really matters.
It's a glorious body of work that Steve Hyden has.
It's really about me. It's not about these bands. It's about me. So
it's exactly correct. Exactly.
And so to that point, you're deeply ingrained in a wide swath of fan communities. It's not just the jam world, and I think that's pretty incredible. We all need to remember that other music does exist. So in your experience, have you seen this type of gatekeeping in other genres? Like, I don't know, was Radiohead fans, trying to stop the second British invasion? As you can see, we did our deep research for this.
Right. No, I mean, I wrote about this a bit in my Goose piece, that like when I started getting into the jam scene really about 10 years ago or so, and that was really when I started getting into Fish, like early 2010s. And I was already like a Grateful Dead fan at that point. But part of what drew me into that scene was this idea that this scene wouldn't have the same sort of taste arguments that you see in indie rock happen all the time. Arguments about credibility. Is this group more credible than this? Is this more relevant than that? Which looking at indie rock in like the late 2000s, early 2010s, it just seemed endemic to every conversation. And to me, it seemed like sort of anti-music. It didn't seem to be about, is this a great song? Are you connecting with this emotionally? It seemed to be more about whatever was in trend at the moment. And I was very exhausted by that. So I looked at the jam scene and I was like, well, these people just seem to be totally invested in music. So I'm going to go into this scene and maybe it'll be a little bit more pure. And of course, I was totally wrong about that. It's
very little pureness in the scene, to be honest. Maybe the purest is Peter, but
pure, but in terms of not being judgmental, the judgmental nature of it. I thought this scene's not going to be judgmental, and in fact, I found in a way the jam scene was even more judgmental than the indie scene. So it is really interesting to see how these sort of binaries get created between loving this band versus loving this band. It's and we, I alluded to this earlier, but I do this Grateful Dead podcast, 36 from the Vault, and we did every season that we do the show, we do a curveball episode where we talk about a band who's not the Grateful Dead. And the first season we did was on Fish. We talked about one of the Island Tour shows from 98. And that was, and we've done subsequent curveballs after that. We did a curveball on Bob Dylan. We did a curveball on Radiohead. And Fish was by far the most polarizing show. Grateful Dead fans, some of them love Fish, but the ones who didn't love Fish hated Fish, and were adamantly against talking about Fish on a Grateful Dead podcast. And again, it reminds me of like the Goose conversation. Like, there's just people, and look, everyone has a right to feel like how they feel about a band. You have a right to your own taste, but it's very interesting to me, the people who get actively angry about Goose. You know what I mean? Like, there's people who
it's crazy.
There's people who, and like, I just know, like, in the reaction to my article, which again I think was largely positive, but there were people, I had people tweeting at me like, "You're an idiot," or like, you're this, or you're that, for me talking about Goose. And like,
inbox. I'm the biggest idiot. So
and my thing was like, even if you don't like Goose, it's like, this is like an ascended band, regardless of how you feel about them, they're worth writing about, because they're clearly on the rise. They're clearly doing something where they're building an audience. So they're worthy of conversation. Of course, I really like Goose, so I think that they're, like, artistically that we're talking about, but even just looking at them as a phenomenon, I mean, I think they're worth discussing. But yeah, I don't know. To me, it's just very interesting to see, you don't see the parallels of like Fish being dismissed to like Goose being dismissed. I just think it's such an obvious parallel that I because like I don't want to focus too much on like the haters here. You don't want to focus too much on the haters, but I to me, it's such an obvious parallel there. To not notice that is amazing to me.
And then there are even those, like, besides like the Fish fans who get upset if you bring up Goose, there are Goose fans who get upset if you bring up Fish, where it goes the opposite way, where like, we don't want that comparison, but like, there's something about understanding music when you're trying to explain it to other people that like, you have to make that initial comparison of like, they're kind of not even, they don't even have to sound like, let's say, Fish necessarily. Like, it's kind of fun to do that comparison of like the stage they're at, of like, you mentioned in the article that like, Fish was playing, small bars, then theaters, and they were selling out theaters, and then they went to, arenas, and like, to watch Goose do all of that is, it's somewhat of a comparison, and like, to kind of tell that story is, it's fun to talk about.
Yeah, and I think like in the jam scene, there's like so few bands that have had a trajectory where they progress from a certain level up to a higher level, that naturally you're going to compare them to the kingpin bands of the scene, because there's just not a lot of other comparisons to make, and you don't necessarily have to say like, well, musically they're the same. I mean, I think in the case of Goose, like what's so, I think what makes them a singular band, and like what makes them great, is that they don't sound like the Dead or Fish. Like they have their own reference points, they have their own influences, but in terms of their trajectory, it's similar to those bands, because there's so few bands that have done it the way that Fish or the Grateful Dead have done it. And to see Goose following in that path, I think it's like an obvious comparison to make, and it's like a limited comparison. You're just, it's like a very kind of strictly limited thing. But it's just appreciating the way that they're going about building an audience.
Right. And I couldn't agree more. And a lot of people want to ascribe similarities to them where they don't exist. And I think it almost goes back to that point so that they can make this point that they're trying to make about diminishing Goose or, you know, degrading the quality of their music or whatever. You know, and it just goes, it's just an odd, you know, it's like you said, they're not mindful or aware of these things that they're latching onto that many people have, in my opinion, made the mistake of latching onto in the past. You know, they become fanatical about a certain band, which I think to some extent that people see some Goose fans coming off that way. You know, where they're really, you know, they're coming off as fanatical because they love the band so much. But in reality, they're just absorbed with a new and exciting thing in their lives, you know, and just trying to express some of their joy about that assuredly Phish fans have done for many years, that I did as a part of that community for a long time. And, you know, that people did as Dead fans too. So it would be nice to move past that, you know, eventually, and we won't have to focus on any of the haters, but they're just such a prevalent voice out there that it can be hard not to bite sometimes and give in and talk a little bit about it. But I think this was a great talk about that. I did not expect that, because we had so many things like your article and your books to talk about that I didn't think. But this was a great tangent, because it's hard to have a good conversation about this and be able to give people a sense of it and you know, a more realistic sense of what it is, and you know, how it's really an unimportant blemish in the scene that you know, we can just move past and allow people to accept what's new and exciting, without kind of trying to extract joy from that process for them.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I mean, in a way, you could construe this as a compliment to Goose, because, you know, if they weren't as good as they are, they wouldn't be in this conversation. You know, like there's like a lot of bands that are in this scene that I don't think have risen to this level of prominence. You know, if you get to the level like where people aren't into what you're doing, it is a compliment to what you are as a band, because if you don't have people who aren't upset at what you're doing, it means that you just haven't like actually reached a critical mass yet.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like Goose has reached that critical mass at the point where it's like, okay, people are having a conversation about them. And I really feel like some of the people who aren't into what they're doing, they're going to be singing a different tune in about 6 months. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they're going to feel differently in about 6 months, because
I have so many friends who like were just diehard Phish fans, would not get into, let alone Goose, any other bands. And they come to their first show and it's like, okay, I get it. Then they're listening to it nonstop for 3 months. And then they come to their second show and that's it.
I really think that's the thing. I mean, the thing about this scene is that the biggest bands have been around literally for like 30 to 50 years. Okay, you know what I mean?
Yeah, they're old. Sorry, old.
There's a lot of you know, they're old, which I'm not you know,
which is fine. It's fine. We're not ageist on the Great Beyond. So
I love Phish. I love Dead and Company, but it's like they have built a brand over the course of decades, which at this point is indisputable. So like if you are comparing, if you're inclined to compare an up and coming band to a brand that's been, you know, around for decades, yeah, they're going to struggle against that because they don't have the track record. And it's not like a normal music scene where you continually have new blood being, you know, put into the scene and older brands kind of like fade in the background. In the jam scene, it's still like you're compared against like literally the greatest to ever do it.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah,
so
that's a good point. Yep.
So, you know, if you're an up and coming band, you're going to struggle against that a little bit. So I understand that, but yeah, I don't know. I just feel like, because I know people too who are Phish fans or Grateful Dead fans who sort of scoff at like whatever is the up and coming thing, but it's like, no, like this is for real. Like, and you can't just rely on these bands that have been around forever. You have to embrace the new at some point, and especially like when they deliver the goods.
Yeah. For sure.
So I really feel like the energy eventually will be on the side of the new,
or at least
it always is with music, I think.
And it's good to go ahead and let other people embrace the new as well if you don't want to, and just kind of be, accepting of that, not so vocally against that, trying to convince people not to. And because I mean, like you said in the article, you mentioned the Peach Fest video, which had 341,000 views, which at the time of writing, when I saw it, I checked up on it at some point over the last year and was blown away by how many views it had, and was blown away by some of the videos on their YouTube and how many views they had. And of course, that's not everything, but all of these numbers from all the streaming services and YouTube, do come into play in a lot of ways, a lot more ways than people realize. But that's a huge number. And like you mentioned, it's not even a blip. It's not even it's nothing considered even close to viral in the pop world, which is one of my favorite types of music. But it covers a lot of genres. But it's just another interesting point that, they're still up and comers. They're still working very hard and trying to make their brand. And it will be cool to see how this year transcends, but that Peach Fest 2 brought in all of these fans. It brought in a ton of Dead fans who go to Peach all of the time. It brought in Fish fans. And this was I guess, the natural way of how things are going to sort themselves out between those groups in that sense. So it was bound to happen,
Yeah, I remember seeing that Peach Fest video, and then there was another video. I'm trying to remember. It was somewhere in Kentucky. Was it Covington, Kentucky?
Covington. Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I remember seeing that video at the same time, and just feeling like wow, like these guys are like really good, and I haven't really heard of them before. Like that was the beginning of me getting into Goose. But what's amazing about this band is that I was enjoying the stuff that I was listening to in 2019, and I thought they were like a really good band, but this band is still so relatively young in the trajectory that you can listen to shows certainly from like 2021, and as we're going into 2022, and the growth and the evolution is, I think, so explosive. I mean, I really feel like in the last like 6, 7, 8, 9 months listening to Goose stuff, like live recordings, you just hear them evolving constantly. And I mean, just the shows that they've played in 2022, you listen to like their San Francisco run, and you listen to like the Nashville run, and it's like like a 2-month difference, and it's like wow, like they are growing so quickly. And for me, like that is one of the most exciting things about following this band, is that as opposed to, again, like I love Fish and I love Dead and Company, but with a band like Goose, you just can hear the changes from show to show so much more clearly. And you just feel like if you're following this band, the evolution is just like exponential, from like week to week or to month. And that's what I would say to people who are maybe a little skeptical, that like this band is not fixed as much as maybe some of the older bands. This band is like exploding, as they're playing, as they're moving along on their tours. You just like to hear a band evolving in real time the way Goose is. It's really exciting to listen to, and that's been like something for me that's been like so great, with following them.
And you mentioned the 2022 run, like how much they're evolving, and you wrote in the article too that the Dripfield album is like a proper debut for them, and that's what like these new songs are like changing them. Like the singles that came out are totally different from the old stuff, and it's almost like we're getting a taste of what Goose is going to sound like in the future.
Yeah, I mean
that this run is exactly that.
Yeah, well, and I'm glad you brought up the album, because, and this is something I wrote in my article, and I cut out this sentence because I didn't want it to be taken the wrong way. But like originally I wrote in my article that when I started listening to Dripfield, that I was really surprised by how much I liked the album. And I I didn't want it to be taken the wrong way. I didn't want it to be taken as like a backhanded compliment. What I meant by that is that when I listen to jam bands, typically, I don't really care about studio albums all that much. And this is true of even like the Grateful Dead or Fish. You know, I tend to just listen to like live recordings, and that's what it's all about. But Dripfield, I really feel like, and the reason why I called it a proper debut is that, like, in comparison to the first two Goose albums, I really feel like this is an album that it feels like an album. It feels like more than just like a band going into a studio and playing live and recreating their studio set. Like, this feels like a band actually like conceiving of recordings in a studio fashion that can stand apart from whatever it is they do live. And I really like the album a lot. I think it's like a really good album, and I think they really did a good job of like creating something separate from what they do live.
Absolutely.
Obviously Goose is a great live band, but like this is like a really good record.
Definitely.
And it can stand on its own as a record
for sure.
And like for bands in that scene, I think that's like a hard thing to do. Like, and again, like talking about the greatest bands from the scene, they're not always able to pull that off. I mean, I really feel like, you know, whatever like Fish did on like Billy Breathes, I think that's like what Goose did on Dripfield. Like it feels like that to me.
Oh boy. Here we go.
That's it right there.
Okay.
Down
I can throw that out there. Well,
I'm closing down the group after this episode gets released.
They were both, you know, both records were recorded in upstate New York. You know,
they were.
That's like a similar vibe. But yeah, I mean, and to me, like having heard the other Goose records, to me, it's just like it's leagues beyond like what they've done on record before this. And I really feel like when people, like when the fans hear it, you know, because I remember, like, I didn't really get into this in the article, but like I talked to Rick, and you know, I talked to Rick about this, about how, you know, like, how do you feel like if fans aren't going to care about this album? You know, are they going to care more about the studio record than the album? And he was like, I really don't care. Like, you know, and he talked about this in my piece, like how he is really into recording. Like that's like a big deal for him. And I don't know, I think I think they did a great job with this album. I really think it really stands on its own as an album. And you can appreciate the live stuff, and as we all do, but it just sounds like a really good record.
I cannot wait. I cannot wait till June to hopefully hear people agree with you.
I really think people are going to dig the record. I really feel like, you know, if you're into Fleet Foxes, Vampire Weekend, whatever, like indie rock records, like this can totally stand with those albums as like a really good studio record. And you can dig this, you can dig the live stuff, but you know, like Born and you know, Dripfield, I don't know, like across the board, Honeybee,
they got a lot of they got a lot of hits on that too. You know, like So Ready, like Hot Tea. So yeah.
So to that point, you know, as an adroit music listener, that your tastes extend beyond, you know, the jam bands we're talking about. What are some of the influences you could immediately recognize when listening to Dripfield, some other bands? Because I think also to your point, the band really does a great job to create an experience with an album, right? And I think you're spot on. I think this album really tells the story of where they are right now. But also I think they take some more risks. They take more risks than they did on Moon Cabin or Shenanigans. So I'm wondering what else you hear in the music. Which other bands really stick out to you?
I mean, I mentioned, yeah, I mean, obviously Bon Iver is a big influence, and like, and I mentioned Vampire Weekend already. You know, one influence that really came across when I listened to the record more than maybe them playing live was like Fleet Foxes. I really felt that kind of vibe on this album, like the harmonies on the record, and you know, which I think are naturally going to come across more on an album maybe than like playing live, because it's just more enveloping, and you feel like the real beauty of that.
Right.
So I felt like that was like a real influence on the album. I mean, I think you know, and I'm sure you guys have talked about this on your podcast a lot, but I really think that like with Rick and Peter, there's an emphasis on songwriting, and there's an emphasis on like relatively concise, catchy melodies.
Oh, absolutely.
That you don't necessarily expect maybe from a band like this. But I think that really comes across on the record. I mean, at the same time, you do also get the expansiveness, like the instrumental sort of stretching out on the record. Obviously, yeah, you're not going to get like any 20-minute songs on the studio record, obviously.
Right. Yeah.
But I don't know. Like every time I listen to it, I just really feel like, oh yeah, like this is like an indie pop record. You know, like this is not like a jam band record. I feel like anyone who you know, just like likes indie, like a catchy indie pop, you know, Vampire Weekend, Local Natives, that like Bon Iver, Fleet Foxes, like that kind of thing, would be into this album. Aside from any kind of jamminess going on, it's like a really kind of tuneful, catchy, very listenable album. Like you just want to listen to it again after it ends.
Yeah,
like
and I
kind of record.
think that's what's always sold Goose's success a little bit. And one of the things that we've thought for a long time, and I've always told the story about Lead the Way and humming the song after a show years ago for a whole week, which would never happen when I'd leave a jam band show, you know, because they could come up with these catchy melodies and actually focus on songs to the extent that old bands used to. You know, the Dead were very much focused on songs. The Beatles are one of the best songwriting, like John Lennon and Paul McCartney, one of the best songwriting duos in American history. And like, even though they're British. And I mean, it just, all of these things were so important from a song standpoint and from an album construction standpoint, having a cohesive album that's one whole piece of art from the band in a point in time, and it flows well, and these songs are re-listenable. And we've known that because we've listened to some of the same songs. Greg's heard All I Need 4,000 times, and with Hot Teas on there, which people have heard a ton of times, but these are songs you can continue to go back to and listen to, and they have different versions of the same songs that really help, provide some variety and give people a taste of something that's equally good, but almost similar and familiar, but one of the things you mentioned was like calling it an indie pop album. And you mentioned in the article, which I really liked, was this pop psychedelic reference that you made to the album. But so they also talked a little bit about the title of jam band, and so there's problems with that I do understand, and I thought it was great that you left it in there. It did also, like many things, cause some drama amongst fans. But I was wondering, for you as a wordsmith, what do you think fits them best? They go by this indie groove, which I like to make fun of constantly. Pop psychedelic is cool. Shout out to our neighbor Sonia Jefferson, who came up with Jamyatica as a mix of Jamtronica and yacht rock, which I love. It's amazing. It's like, what do we call? How do we identify this band that has so many influences and is pulling in people from other fan bases? And how would you identify them?
I don't know. I mean, personally, I like the term jam band. I don't see anything negative with that. I really appreciated Rick being as candid as he was about the idea of jam band being a limiting term, that like when you call a band a jam band, that you're sort of automatically turning off like a lot of different people. So I mean, pop psychedelia could be good, or indie pop could be good. You know, ultimately it just comes down to hopefully as many people as possible just being able to sample the music and hearing it for what it is without being encumbered by these terms, because I always feel like genre terms are very restrictive and, you know, sort of inherently limiting anyway. You know, like whatever it is you want to describe something as, it just seems like it always puts a classification on it. You know, the thing I wanted to say quick was that it's kind of amazing to me how many songs are not on this album that like people have been hearing Goose play, you know, in these like early winter months, you know, songs that I love, you know, like Redbird or Silver Lining, you know, or
talk about songs that are stuck in my head for weeks after a show. Redbird,
you know,
that like vocal layering.
Yeah, Redbird is like such a great song.
Straight Bird,
Straight Bird, yeah, Ryan Storm. Shout out Ryan.
No, we don't shout out our podcast competitors here.
Oh, the competitor? All right. I meant Styron Rye Storm.
Right, whoever that is. Yeah, exactly.
But there's so many songs that they've you know, premiered and have become part of their sets that aren't on this record yet, which will presumably be on the next record. But yeah, again, it just speaks to, I think, the exploding creativity that's going on with Goose right now, which again is like another very exciting thing I think about following this band.
Definitely.
That you know, literally every week you feel like there's a new stride, you know, being made by Goose. So it's a very fun time to be following like what they're up to. But yeah, I mean, again, I think the record it stands on its own as like just a really great listen that you can enjoy. And I think sonically there's like some really cool things going on that go beyond what you would hear in a live recording, that will make a, you know, because again, it's great to hear live recordings and to hear the energy and the invention that happens in the moment with a live recording. But again, like the record itself, I just think it's like a really good like record that you want to put on. And I love that it's coming out in June, because I think it's going to be a really good summertime album.
Yeah. Something special about both the studio medium and the live medium, you know, for sure.
Yeah. But I think it's an exciting thing, because I know from talking with Rick, and I think Peter, you know, feels the same way, that they are dedicated to making the best records that they can make. It's not just about playing live. It's about making records that work as records. And it's not just about us going in a studio and recreating what we do on stage, which I think that approach is inherently flawed. You're not going to be able to do that. If you're just going to go into a studio and play as you would on stage, it's not going to be as exciting. But they seem to have, I think, a pretty smart approach to making records, and making records that work as records. And that's a hard thing to do, but I really think with Dripfield, they pulled it off. And again, I wrote this in my piece and I cut out the line because I didn't want it to come off as like a, you know, an underhanded compliment, that like this was better than I expected. Like I was not expecting much from like a studio record from this jam band that I love. And they did it, and like it's like a really good record. I really think they delivered. And I think if you're a Goose fan, you should be excited to check out Dripfield.
I am.
And if you're not one, you will be a fan soon.
Yeah.
Let's switch gears a little bit, and I want to talk. I think for the first time we've gone this long in an interview without really digging into the live experience. But obviously these guys are on fire, right? They have killed it this winter tour. Really left an impression across the country. You mentioned you've seen the band 3 times. So I'm wondering, well, I kind of know, but for our listeners, which shows you went to and what were some of the highlights of those shows?
So the first show I saw was at the Troubadour in early 2020.
Mm-hmm.
It was February 2020. First time I saw them, they were opening up for Pigeons playing ping pong.
Mm-hmm.
And that was obviously, you know, not a full experience. I think they played for about 45 minutes. But it was really fun to see them at that show. The second show I saw was in Eau Claire. It was July of 2021. And that was such a beautiful setting. It was outdoors. And I hope they play there again, by the way. It was like where they hold the Blue Ox Music Festival in Eau Claire. I don't know if they're, because Goose played there 2 nights. I only saw one night because the next, I think it was July 2nd. The next night, July 3rd, I had to be with my family because that's like 4th of July. So I couldn't be away from the family. I would have liked to have gone to both shows for that. That was a beautiful setting, though. I really hope they do that again.
We had a lot of great reviews from fans about that too. I really did wish I went out there. People loved it.
Just a great setting, great. And I am biased because it's not that far from where I live. So, you know, nice. I would like to go to another show there. And then the third show I saw was at First Avenue here in Minneapolis, which is where I live. And that was early February. And that was the best show
that was a great show.
Personally,
yeah,
that was so fun.
Fantastic. Yeah.
And that was just, you know, and I don't know, I don't hear people talking about that as a great show. And, you know, Goose was playing so many heaters at that time. I remember being at that show, being really, because I was pretty close to the stage actually, and I just loved how loud it was. They were very loud at that show. It was very all enveloping. Yeah. And I was on the Trevor side of the stage.
Oh, that's where you got to be.
All right.
I was feeling like the deep bass tones on that side.
We all love Trevor's deep bass tones. Let me tell you.
Man. I love, you know, I'm a sucker for the impassive bassist, bass player who's just like, I'm shredding, but I'm not doing anything. You know,
literally like motionless.
John Entwistle and the Who, or like Larry Mullen and U2, or, you know, like so many great bass players like that. But Trevor has that same demeanor, which I love that, where I'm just like, I'm totally stationary, but I'm like just playing the deepest grooves that you can imagine. So I was on the Trevor side and I was feeling the deep grooves. So that was great. So yeah, so those are the 3 shows I've seen. And I was gonna maybe gonna try to see the next night in Madison, but I couldn't make it, and I'm kind of sad about that because I feel like, how many venues like this are Goose gonna be playing here in the years ahead? But I don't know. I'm a father and a husband. It was like a midweek show. I'm like, I don't know if I can make this, but it was great. So yeah, so I definitely a solid progression. And each show has been better than the last, I would say.
That's going to keep going that way, so I hope you're ready. But I'm curious what you saw from the audience, like as far as the demographic. Like, I know you wrote a book, Twilight of the Gods, about classic rock, the dwindling of classic rock. But you mentioned how the album is like a complete album, which is kind of going back to that old style of, we're not releasing singles here for streaming or anything. Like, we want this to be an album. I'm curious if you see any, like, I don't even know how to describe it, like any positivity of the future, and the fact that, I mean, there are kids even younger than me, like college kids, who are showing up to these Goose shows, getting it. This is their introduction to the scene, really.
Yeah.
So like, what do you see as the outlook as far as the next generation? And then I guess the validity they're getting from the older, like Deadhead crowd as well, who are going to Goose shows. And it kind of makes me feel, as a younger fan, like, all right, this isn't some accident that I'm just trying to grab onto because I feel it's the next big thing. Like everyone else is kind of agreeing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like the live experience is always going to be relevant to whatever generation there is, and that's outside of the album relevancy art, discussion, which I don't know, that can be kind of tiresome to talk about whether like the album is dying or not. I mean, obviously the album as a concept has continued to live on, but I think for every generation, people want to feel like they're a part of something real, like in a live experience. They want to feel excited. They want to feel like this is touching my heart. And with Goose, like when I've been in the audience, I've seen older people, but I said like a lot of younger people. And this was a quote that I didn't include in my piece, but I interviewed the CEO of Nugs.net, whose name is escaping me.
Brad Serling.
Brad Serling.
Yep.
And he made I think a very relevant point about how like when he went to go see Goose, this was kind of like a funny comment, but he was like, you go to a lot of jam band shows, and it's like a bunch of like guys at the railing, guys at the railing just like hanging out and seeing a band. And when he went to go see Goose, he was like, there were a lot of women at the show. There were women dancing at the show.
Thank you, Jeff.
And yes, thanks, Jeff. Yeah.
And thank you, women, for being there. It sure makes my life better.
and I think his point was that some of this kind of music can get a little esoteric. It can get a little dry. It can be about just kind of pushing it out to this very far kind of realm of psychedelic transcendence, which is great. But if you're going to be a band that connects with people, there is that matter of it's Friday night or Saturday night. I want to dance. I want to have a good time. And I think what Goose has, and I think this is also what Fish had and what Grateful Dead have, is that you have the esoteric element where they're improvising music and it gets very experimental, and it's great and it's expanding your mind, but you also have to deliver on like the basic level of I want to have a good time, I want to dance, I want to feel something here. And you go to a Dead show, you go to a Fish show, people dance, they're having a good time. And I think with Goose, people go to a Goose show, they're having a good time, they're dancing, so I think in this scene, that's always like the magical balance of can you deliver the sort of mind expanding element, and can you also deliver like the booty expanding element? Can you make the booty move? Can you make the mind move?
Right.
And I think the real after Butter Rum, the real test is if they can cover "Want to Dance with Somebody" by Whitney. That's the next thing that I'm going to see if they can do. That's the next thing, but we'll get there. Maybe a Radio City if they like me.
Right. But it's like Goose is fun, and they're also like like they can like move your like mind, and they can move your mind, they can move your soul, and that's a hard thing to do. And I think like a lot of groups struggle to strike upon that balance. And I think Goose is really hitting upon that. And I think that's one of the things that makes them special. And because there's like a lot of groups that like appeal only to, like the brain, and maybe they appeal more to like the Twitter, constituency. But you go to the shows and like, you see a lot of people like this, like they got their arms crossed and they're not moving and there's not a lot of fun. And it's like, okay, you're only going to get so far if it's a bunch of arms crossed dudes who are like 45 years old and have like receding hairlines. You know what I mean? You gotta you gotta also have an element that appeals to like the 22-year-old who like wants to have fun and dance, and they're both equally valid in my mind.
I much more closely relate to that 22-year-old for sure, even though the receding hairline has been long since gone, actually.
Right.
So, yeah.
And I'm an old dude too. Like, I'm not going to be dancing, but like, I do like being at a show and seeing like, okay, people who are less decrepit than me are dancing,
enjoying themselves a little bit. Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, this is like, it should be like that. And I appreciate feeding off that vibe of like the, you know, people who are dancing.
Absolutely.
You need that.
Oh yeah.
We could go at length here about a lot of things. We haven't even dug into Goose vs. Geese, but I'm going to leave it.
No, we need it for next. We need it for part 2. Yeah.
The Goose versus Geese episode, that's got to be like a 3-hour.
Sure. For sure.
It's going to be a battle royale. We're going to invite the Belgian Goose in too. And we're just going to bring everybody into the studio and just literally hash it out like a cage match. It's going to be wild. But it's down the road.
So down the road. Yeah, I think so. We'll plan to have you back on for that episode in a few years when the headline officially is Goose has officially become classic rock. And we'll figure out, you know, when we make it to those goalposts.
Love it.
You know, for now, you know, I think
like Joe Walsh will sit in with Goose.
That'll be the clear sign. Yeah. Joe Walsh should be 105 by then, but he'll still be playing.
The unexpected torch passing that nobody knew was coming.
I will love it. I'll write another 4,000 word article about that.
All right.
That's it. We're signing it in blood. So, you know, I think just to wrap, it's an exciting time. What do you see coming next for the band in the next couple of years? I'm not privy to anything as their publicist, so maybe you can tell me some things.
Kept in the dark completely.
What do you see coming next for them? What do you want to see come next for them? And what are you excited about with them?
Well, you know, I wouldn't make any predictions for them. But I would just say that you know, my hope for them is that they just continue on the trajectory that they're on, which, you know, artistically, as we were saying before, I just feel like they keep growing by leaps and bounds as a live act. That, you know, if you're following the live shows on Bandcamp or on Nugs, it just feels like, oh, this, whatever it is that they're up to is just like really exciting. So I hope that continues. And in terms of their popularity, I just think that it'll just follow as a matter of course from that if they continue to just be a great live band and putting out really good records, that they'll keep growing their audience, and they will live up to the headline that I root for them, because again, I really feel like that. I think that they earned that. So, you know, I hope that they keep you know, moving on that trajectory, I guess.
Yeah. I like that. I also hope that they get rich enough to give me a cushy 6-figure job doing nothing. So we keep rooting for the band on this show.
Well, I guess we'll stop there and get this edited so we can get it out to Twitter and, of course, seek their approval.
Please be gentle.
Please.
Be gentle, Twitter. So, Steven Hyden, thank you so much for joining us. As I mentioned,
thank you for having me.
Podcaster extraordinaire, writer extraordinaire, new book coming this year. Thank you so much, Steven.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steven, man. That was great.
We want to once again thank our very special guest, Steven Hyden, for joining us today. It was great to talk to him a little bit about why Goose is your favorite classic rock band.
And even though, you know, they're getting up towards retirement age and they're not on tour anymore, we've got some very special episodes planned for all of you that we're really excited about. So be sure to be on the lookout for those dropping every other Wednesday.
The Great Beyond is presented by Osiris Media and engineered by Greg Knight from his apartment in Brooklyn. On behalf of my co-hosts, I'd once again like to thank Steven for joining us today, our manager, Kathleen Knight, and most of all, you, the listeners, for tuning in. Be sure to catch a ride with us next time. It's on the pathway to the great beyond.
Osiris.